Well, let's see. Today, I guess I thought we would talk about what the overarching idea here is regarding the Gospel of Philip and the rest of the Gospels, so-called Gnostic Gospels, as well as the canonical Gospels. It's pretty wide-ranging, so I guess I just want to be real, how should I say, just sort of glib about it and just sort of do it, like an overall picture, I guess, of what it is that I'm looking at. Of course, like anything else, I'm always kind of on my own thing, looking at whatever project I happen to be interested in at the moment, trying to tie it together with everything else. And I guess I've been wanting to delve into the Gospel of Philip for a long time, but that is a real information-dense document that's full of all kinds of statements. And I've been trying to do a series on it, of course, which I guess a lot of your people have been, following it.
Right.
And I'm planning on continuing it too. It's like I said, it's very sort of information dense. And a lot of times when you go into explaining things, you have to go on a lot of tangents and bring in a lot of like external witnesses and stuff like that. You got to bring a lot of things to bear as far as, trying to present it. So I thought, well, we could go that way with it a little bit, but I kind of want to be a little bit glib about it. Some of the major themes, I think, in this book and in these books, and again, it's something that we talk about and touch on, but I want to be able to articulate it, I think, and I think I'd like it if other people could articulate it too, because, for this to move forward, and this is the big picture, is where are we going with this? What does this mean? How do we present this? How do we bring this to the world? The idea is that the elect is basically an army of people, of Christian foot soldiers to come at the end of time, the end of the age, to bring to an end the fog of war, so to speak, of the spiritual battle that we've been fighting, and to bring clarity to the situation and to bring people new eyes to see with and new ears to hear with. I mean, there is a directive in the book of Enoch, for example, that speaks of the elect and their role and how it is that we are to reveal this to the people with our wisdom. And so how are we achieving this? Well, one of the things that we know about is that there's always this future wisdom, this future teaching that the Bible speaks of, and that these scriptures always speak of. There's a future time, a coming of wisdom, a coming of knowledge. Jesus himself says, I will give you a mouth and a wisdom that no one will be able to deny or to gainsay. So it's going to be something pretty ironclad, like as if it were, as if it were weapons and battle gear or whatever set aside for us at the end of time. It is essentially a gospel of sorts. It is a good news movement. Like, hey, we've hit upon an inheritance here. We've hit upon a knowledge and an understanding that's for everybody. And I think there's some parallels. I think people are looking at a giant awakening coming over the whole world, a fog sort of lifting. And this is part of that. The Bible speaks of Babylon falling, the forces of evil failing, erring. And I think we're sort of slowly but surely coming to a head here where the sheep, if you will, get a chance to be, in a sense, separated from the goats. Now, one of the things that we are instructed to do, because it's really easy to get into the whole us versus them, good versus evil paradigm, which I don't think this is where this is wanting me to go. I mean, one of the reasons I try to stay low key is because, like everybody else, I have my own thoughts and my own biases, and one of the things I have to fight all the time is my tendency to follow my own opinion and my own ideas on things, when in fact, the directive is to submit yourself to God's plan and his opinion. It takes a lot of discipline, to extend the olive branch, so to speak, to your quote unquote enemies, and to show them the love and the kindness and the mercy, what I'm saying, that you're told to show them. It's easier to bludgeon them over the head with the truth, and, take that,
Yeah.
But I think we're sort of called to extend an olive branch. That's why, one of the things it talks about in this book, for example, and really all of the books, is not only the unitary thought, but being magnanimous, loving your enemies, showing them kindness, the idea that, left and right are enemies of, are not enemies of each other. They're just two sides of the same coin, let's say. That the idea is to win them over. And so I feel like the way forward in terms of winning them over, don't kowtow to the world. Don't take the, you're not to make yourself in the image of the world, but short of that, to be accommodating and to be, to do an outreach. In other words, and I'm guilty of this myself. I'm very guilty of being like preaching to the choir, so to speak, and not taking this out to the world. I mean, I put it out there for people in the world to see. But the idea is that, again, we're given this knowledge, and we talked about this so many times. I mean, it's the keys, right? That's clear. I mean, most of us have been able to discern that there are keys. But knowing how to read these scriptures and knowing how to put them together is integral, I think, to unifying the body, so to speak, at the end of time. I mean, if what I'm saying is true, if what I'm saying has validity to it, if it's something we can flesh out, then the obvious thing is, what do we do with this? Where are we supposed to take this? How are we supposed to present this? And while we're still grappling with it and trying to sort it all out, which this is kind of an attempt to do. I'm trying to flesh these kinds of things out as much as possible for people to digest, so that they do get eyes to see and they do get ears to hear. And it's kind of like one candle lights another, lights another, lights another. That we're like that in the world. That and wisdom speaks of this as well. That we're like sparks running through the stubble in the world, or whatever. It's the ideas that we are lights, and we light up the world. And this is just universal throughout. I don't see the barriers that other people see because of that language, because of the keys, because of the knowledge. And you become awakened, so to speak. It speaks of in Thomas where you shake off your wine, so to speak, and you become sober, quote unquote, as in spiritually sober, as in spiritually aware. This is, how should I say it? I can't overstate the importance of understanding the material. Yeah. And that's why I try to make the attempt to do it. I try to do so, first of all, for myself, because as always, everything I've ever done has been my own personal study. I don't have, an institute. I don't have an agenda. I don't have any of that stuff. I'm not trying to, quote unquote, push anything or whatever. It's just like I'm reading it stuff and I'm hearing stuff and I'm putting two and two together and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, I get it. And that conforms to everything else that I've seen so far. And, I just want people to have that knowledge as well. I want people to be as aware of these things and as versant in these things as I am, and even more so, and I say to myself, well, I may not be the most quote unquote classically educated person or whatever. I may not have the quote unquote best study, whatever patterns, skills, whatever, and that's part of the reason I kind of beat myself up a little bit over it, like because of my own imperfections and my own flaws and stuff like that. Do I really have something to contribute here? But the idea is that this is a gift handed down to us by forces that are far greater than us, and that he will use whatever people he chooses to use for whatever reason. And this is another thing that Philip delves into, as well as Thomas and other places, where, no one would put something really valuable inside of something really valuable. They're going to put it inside of something that, how should we say, is worth a penny, I think is what it says in this book. So the idea is that that's great. That's great for everybody, because you don't have to be so great. You don't have to be so, you don't have to be super deferent to other people. You don't have to say, oh, well, that, let the light shine on this person, that person, or the other person, because we're all lights. You know what I'm saying? We're all seeing with the same eyes and hearing with the same ears, if these keys are true, if this knowledge is unitary, right? And so we become unified when we share the same point of view. Right. And it's funny how enemies can become friends if they gain a mutual nemesis, let's say. You know, it's kind of like some old cartoon where like two enemies are handcuffed together, right? But they're both running from something, and all of a sudden they have to work together because necessity has put them in that position, you know, and so there is no us versus them. We're all in the same boat. The idea is that Christians are all in different boats, so to speak. They're all in different denominations. They're all coming from different, you know, points of view. And I think, how is it that we move forward? I mean, as far as providing people with the tools that they need to actually implement God's plan. I think that's an interesting question that we should all be asking, because some of us have resources, some of us have connections, some of us have gifts, some of us, you know, I have always found that there's nothing special about me. In fact, this is why I walk in a world where people, I could literally tell them anything that I'm telling you right now, and it seems to bounce right off of them, because looking at me, I'm absolutely unimpressive. You know what I'm saying? And you know, it is what it is. You know, I accept that. But I sometimes I have to laugh to myself, because if you think about it, Moses and the prophets brought us a testament.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus and the apostles brought us a testament. You know what I'm saying? And those of us at the end of time, you know, the nothings and the nobodies, the people at the end of the streets who got invited to the wedding feast because everybody else said no, right?
Yes.
He's like, anyone you happen to find, bring them in, right? And we're that, you know? And I'm not saying we're all dregs or whatever. I'm just saying we're kind of ragtag. We're kind of the rebels, so to speak, in all of this. We're, you know, there are a lot of events, I think, that are happening in the world where people are becoming more aware that, hey, you know, maybe everything I've always been told, maybe it's not 100% correct. You know, maybe there are things that institutions and things I used to believe in that maybe I don't believe in so much anymore. You know what I'm saying? And so this is sort of an opportune moment where people are losing their old paradigms and moving into newer paradigms where maybe they're becoming more awake, maybe they're becoming more aware, maybe they're becoming more sober, so to speak. You know, because the times call for people to shift their paradigms. The situation is where people are becoming disillusioned about maybe institutions and pillars of society that they once had 100% confidence in and they could take for granted. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, maybe I can't trust these people. You know, maybe these people aren't 100% honest. Maybe they're not always telling us the truth. And I think that extends a little bit into Christianity. You know, people were looking at 2000 as being kind of like this seminal year where like things are going to happen. And now we're like 21 years past this. And I think that people are questioning, well, where do we, I mean, okay, so it came and it went, now what? You know, what is left for us? And the idea here is that there is a treasure that's hidden in earthly vessels. The earthly vessels being the lower level meaning, if you will, of the higher level meaning. You know, so the idea is that these books that were left out, and also the books that we have too. I mean, this is universal. Again, it's the unitary thought. I could just as easily go through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and point out these things. Like if you read the guidebook for the elect, for example, I've gone through much of, you know, many of these keys, so to speak, using the canonical scriptures and expositing these things in the canonical scriptures. So, you know, I encourage people to go and find the guidebook for the elect and listen to that. And also understanding Paul. Like where I left off the other day with the virgin birth, the next section was going to be how Jesus is a, let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, Jesus is a hidden name. Christ is a revealed name. So Jesus is not translated, but he's called by his name Jesus. But the name Christ in Syriac is Messiah, Greek Christ, and all the others have it according to their own language. And the Nazarene reveals what is hidden. Okay, Christ has everything within himself, whether human or angel or mystery, and the Father. Well, okay, so you break that down. What is the Father? In the Gospel of Truth, it talks about the Father is the hidden mystery, right? You know, and so when you hear the Father, quote unquote, you hear the hidden mystery. Paul talks about everything is hidden in Christ, right? Christ being the higher level meaning, because again, Jesus is his physical name. That is to say, the name he was given at his physical circumcision, the name that he was prophesied to be, or that was commanded for him to be called by the angel. That's that's him in his physicality.
Mhm.
But because he comes in as a living parable, if you will, that he himself is a parable, for example, of the Logos. In the
Mhm.
beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. This is what we believe, right?
Right.
All Christians believe that, right? So the idea is that we, like it says in the Gospel of Thomas, these people are referred to as quote unquote the sick, the ill. And then that's not any way, shape, form, or fashion a denigration of people in general. It just means that they need healing. Jesus didn't denigrate the lepers; he healed them. He didn't denigrate the blind men; he healed them. He opened up their eyes. And the deaf and the mute and all that, just the same. He was there for anyone who needed. He was the great physician who healed. And we're kind of called to do the same thing. Heal those, eat whatever they place before you. By eating, of course, he means whatever they accept spiritually, which again, if they come from the canon, for example, you can explain it to them, I guess, out of the canon. In other words, you're eating what they place before you. You can talk to them about Jude. You could talk to them about the Logos. You could talk to them about the Peter principle, where he means the church, and John means the elect, and James means the Jew. You know what I'm saying? You could go on and on and on about that and open their eyes from what they already believe. The idea here is that we are to go around healing one another and opening each other's eyes, just like in the Dissensus, for example, where it talks about how when the light was dawning in the quote unquote underworld, which again, the way that it applies to us is that this is metaphorical space.
Right.
You see metaphorical space a lot, like in the book of Revelation, and I believe that however literally true the Bible may be, there are always these metaphorical spaces that you have to be able to put yourself in to understand how these things extend to us and what their metaphorical meaning might be. If what Jesus did in the flesh, he did in the flesh as a living parable, if you will, of the Logos, then what it means is that if Jesus died in his physicality, that means that the Logos also died in terms of its spiritual significance.
Right.
But the way that we could use something like that, and anybody who's listened to like my Understanding Paul, for example, could use this information that's in Philip about Jesus being a hidden name, Christ being a revealed name, because that's all something I've exposited for every single one of his books, with the exception of Hebrews, which I may or may not do. But it's almost unnecessary. It's like teaching a man to fish. If you show them what the keys are and you show them how to exposit things, there's no
Mhm.
reason why they can't do it on their own. The only thing you have to keep in mind is the unitary thought, the idea that there is a single language and a single message, and things are hidden and couched in earthly terms, treasures put in earthly vessels,
Mhm.
right? To be released at some point. And that's very liberating to know that, because it makes you come alive in spirit, and it makes you able to articulate things that you would have no way of articulating unless you were reading and translating and your spirit was witnessing within you that, yes, it's true here, it's true there, it's true everywhere, that it all fits together. That is a revelation, and that's life-changing, because again, it is eyes to see, it is ears to hear, it is a mind to think. You gain the mind of Christ. You gain the understanding of what is hidden, right?
Well, can I ask a question, Robert?
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll fall correctly on the topic, but I've mentioned on my show something I realized recently. It's probably something that you already realized a while ago, but the fact that this Third Testament, the books that were removed, and the fact that they were buried underground, many of them dug up in Qumran and things like that, or just marginalized and not touched. We have, just like we have so many denominations, we also have many different versions of the canon. So we have many different interpretations of the canon. And Peter said, the Bible is not up for private interpretation. So in essence, because those books that were removed were never touched, it would make them virgin in a sense. So if you, just like we take these books to find out that they're correct by basing them against the canon, because it's a solid foundation, the two stones, if you will, because of that solid foundation, it's almost like a back and forth. So we test the virgin ones who have never been touched against the canon, and then also we test the canon against the virgin documents, because in essence, you can test them against them, because nobody ever translated them into other things, because they counted them as base and not necessary. Like, so it's almost like one against, like iron sharpens iron type of thing. And, I don't say that very loosely, but.
No, well, yeah, what eye has not seen, what ear has not heard, and what has not entered into the heart, what hand has not touched, and what has not entered into the heart of man. So right. To your point, the hand now, here's my approach. This is what I do, and I think probably people may find this frustrating, but I always try to stick to things I can prove. There are a lot of things out there that I could get into, a lot of tangents that I kind of don't, because having been an atheist, having been a skeptic, having been the kind of person who really was very sort of cynical about people to some degree, but society at large, reality at large, the whatever information society that we live in. Sure. I always sort of was an island on this, and I followed my own path. I took my own advice, like Jesus said, be passersby. I just followed a different path. That was just me. And coming to realize and to come in to get in touch with this inner knowledge and this inner mystery, this higher level meaning, has necessitated, a sort of a public presence. I've had to take my own teachings or whatever, my own studies, and share them with the world, which I'm grateful for. I mean, like this platform, for example, has given me the means by which I can share what I've learned, and I can show what I've learned. And that's the key. If you're able to show it, if you're able to demonstrate it, okay, I know that there are people out there who are eyes wide shut. Most of the time though, and this is what I think is really kind of tricky about it, because most of the time, those people who blindly follow tradition or just stubbornly question whether anything could be any different from what they were taught or whatever, that they buy into this. And these people are going to have a lot of trouble struggling, to understand. But fundamentally, what these people are is they're following the crowds. They're following the numbers. They're following the, if we show them that there's a movement, if we show them, and I think they're starting to see it. When I started out, there wasn't a whole lot of talk about the Apocrypha and stuff. And I think that's why this sort of took off the way it did at first. And I started getting subscriptions almost right off the bat, because I was talking about stuff back then that wasn't very commonly spoken of. Right. And so it became kind of a lightning rod in that particular area. And so, you're kind of there first, or close to the beginning. And so you get everybody who's looking for that stuff. Everybody finds you early. People had a lot of curiosity about this stuff. But like I said, if you have eyes to see, then you become more sure as you read. If you have ears to hear, you become more sure the more you hear. And so each one of us has insights. Each one of us has something to contribute. That isn't to say that some people out there won't be a little squirrely or won't try to take this in their own direction. That's where discernment comes in. If there's something that you know, and like I said before, I only try to speak to things that I know. And so even when I go through these books, a lot of times I sort of shrug my shoulders and concede that this is beyond me, perhaps. Right. But here's all the other stuff that I can defend. Right. And I try to make it a little bit, I hate to use the word scientific, but I think the Bible backs me up on this. You rightly divide things. You let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? As far as that's concerned. the one thing that I've done is I put myself out there. Like for me, it's a little bit of a risk to say, oh, I'm going to take this book on, because I took on the book of Revelation, for example, and you think about how, I don't know what the word is, how hard it would be to like say, oh, I think I can show you what this means, when other people have grappled with this book, and there are probably as many interpretations as there are people out there, but the keys give you that ability to do that, to have right information, correct information. That means that if you've got a puzzle and you've got 2 or 3 pieces, right, you might be able to come up with the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, right? And then if you get those pieces, then you might be able to come up with, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th piece. You know what I'm saying? You get those together. You know what I'm saying? And it builds, right? Because knowledge builds. And like what you were saying earlier, to speak to your point, iron sharpeneth iron. You hear somebody who, with confidence, can speak to you about the meaning of something that's obscure and show you, well, it tells you exactly what this means right over here. So if you just take and apply this over here, all of a sudden this becomes clear. And once that becomes clear, something else becomes clear. And it's knowledge that builds on itself, and it keeps building, and it keeps building, and it keeps growing, and it keeps growing. And this is how you grow in knowledge, and this is how you grow sort of in confidence about this stuff. I can speak to you glibly because, well, number one, you don't give me a lot of trouble about what I say. That's good and that's bad. I don't, that's echo chamber kind of stuff. I want people to call me on stuff, and they do. And I understand where they're coming from, because I don't want to say it's impossible to answer every single solitary question that there is. It's just that, it's like having to stop and fix your tire. Right. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're trying to make ground, and you have to stop. And as I put it in my last video, you get in the weeds of it, so to speak.
One of the things that would be interesting to talk about is what the church would say to what we say. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like for instance, the modern day church, what they would give as arguments against what we are saying. You know what I'm saying? So we on every single topic that we talk about, they could say, well, this is what we believe. Like for instance, like I would say to somebody like Revelation 1:18, where did Jesus get the keys of hell and death? And somebody would say, oh, blah, blah, blah. But it's not true, because they don't identify or give any credit to the gospel of Nicodemus. So or the dissensus, which they got rid of in 1500 or 1590 or whatever. So things like that, simple things like that. There's many things that the church says that they don't, that we could, so I could bring those up. But it's like, what's the point? Because they're just thinking on a wrong path. They're on the wrong path, so they're always going to give you that wrong answer to what we're talking about, if that makes sense.
Well, if I was on a road trip, let's say, from one place to another, let's say I was driving from New York to Los Angeles, right, and I was just pulling out of New York, right, I think I'd worry about getting on the New Jersey Turnpike or whatever, and then I would worry about where I was going to go, and I would have this general knowledge of where I was going, but I don't necessarily have to know where Hollywood and Vine is. You know what I'm saying? Right. In particular, until I get a little closer to that. The idea is that you're taking what they place before you, and you're eating what they place before you first. Right. And you're getting them you're putting one foot in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other. This is why it's difficult for me when I'm dealing with some people, and well-intentioned people. I'm not questioning their motives really at all. I think people believe what they believe very strongly. It's just there are a lot of arguments that I don't want to get pulled into because they're speculative or they're a little bit too far afield. It's like,
that's what I'm talking about.
You're trying to walk a tightrope. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to walk a tightrope. I'm saying this word is connected to this word. This sentence is connected to this sentence. You know what I'm saying? And I'm trying to keep my eye on the ball. You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't mean that all of these other peripheral issues aren't important. It's just that there's something here that needs to be fleshed out. And in order to treat it properly, it has to be treated as something in and of itself. I don't want to get too far afield onto other topics, which, true or not true, valid or not valid, provable or not provable, aren't really central.
Right.
to this
So
because go ahead.
you mentioned the fact that the Gospel of Philip, which is what we're talking about sort of today, or at least an introduction. This is
Loosely,
supposed to
I'm
be,
trying to relate
yeah.
it to
This is a basically an introduction to a study on the Gospel of Philip, and we're going to bring the PDF and the text in later, if God willing. But as far as what we're talking about, you said that the Gospel of Philip is basically an answers book. So, for instance, the Gospel of Thomas is kind of a questions book. It's almost like you said, spiritual algebra. So, in this being an answers type of gospel, it's very difficult to go through it. So, do you want to talk about that, like how this book specifically and how it relates to what we're talking about as far as like getting this out to the masses and things like that?
Well, it's like I was saying earlier, this book is very information dense. And it does jump around from topic to topic to topic. And a lot of the ideas, it'll bring up something and then it'll bring up something else and it'll bring up something else. And then it'll get back to what it started talking about, 10 pages back or whatever.
Right.
It picks up where, and it's kind of in pieces. And so it's if I start out, and this is part of the problem that I have, because you've got to explain the book in a way that's orderly, but it sort of defies that, like a lot of books actually. I could read Thomas the same way. It's like, well, here's a verse over here that talks about this, and then like 20 verses later it talks about it some other way, and
Right.
then 30 verses after that, what I'm saying? And so you have to be able to. It's hard to approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to approach because it's not laid out in such a discursive way that it explains it all like in one paragraph or all in one section. You got to piece it together. And this is what makes it a little bit tough. But yeah, if you read this book, how many times do you read, this means this means that, this is that? This is like this is like that. These are the hallmarks. These are the things that you look for when you're looking for keys and when you're looking for understanding. Is you're looking for something that you can use. Like you're filling in blanks. Like the idea what we were talking about before with Jesus Christ. If you go again, these are sort of shorthand, statements. I understand that his name was not Jesus, that's but
Yeah.
if you're talking to the world, and again, this is about extending an olive branch. You're reaching out to Christians and you're reaching out to anyone who basically wants a real answer and
Right.
wants the truth. Okay, that's your target audience. Now, there will be people who don't really quote unquote want the answer or want truth. They want their answer and they want their truth, which means they're not truth seekers. They're just trying to validate things that they already believe,
Right.
that they think are accepted or whatever. Those people will have to come, I think, a little bit later. Those people will need a little bit of convincing. And I think that when you talk about the multitude of the wise is the salvation of the world, the idea is that you get enough wise people talking about it, then it becomes a thing. Then it becomes a discussion. At some point we'll reach a tipping point, where things are understood, where things, because they're understood by enough people, you reach a critical mass. And, I'm still waiting for that critical mass, but I think that right now the iron might be getting a little hot and people might be a little more malleable, if you will, with what's true and what's not true, and maybe a little more open to ideas because they're questioning institutions. And really what we read about over and over and over again is Babylon falling. It collapses, if you will, perhaps under its own weight. There's something about it that's unstable.
Yeah. Doesn't it mention something in the text? I'm going to paraphrase, but doesn't it mention something like things get like super, super bad, and at that moment, that's when it awakens or something like that? Like at that time is when all of this awakens.
What verse is that?
I forget. I forget what it is, but yeah, it makes me think of like, everybody's just in this state of, oh my gosh, like nothing happened and it just seems hopeless, and then all of a sudden it awakens. So
we talked about this before too, when the prince, when Jesus was going down into Hades, right, and the light was dawning.
Yep.
You know, we talked about that being the midnight hour. You know,
Right.
it's a paradigm shift. It's like a lot of things, like you get it, and yeah, it's a gradual process where, you know, you learn and you grow and you develop and all, but something about realizing that there's more than what you were told, and having some proof of that, having some evidence of that, having an inner witness that, like, oh, this really is saying stuff that I can understand.
Right.
You know, I really do get this now. This really does make sense to me. You know, you can't go back to them. I mean, that just sort of automatically breaks the, I don't want to say curse, but the spell maybe.
Right.
The idea that you become disillusioned with what you've been told, because you know that the very fundamental thing that undergirds everything they believe is this thing called the canon. And the canon, again, I don't have a problem with anything that's in the canon. You know, I'm not coming at people sideways here. I'm telling you that it's true, and some of it, how should I put it, is stuff that's been explained in such a fleshly fashion or in such an off way because of the blinders that puts on you. If you think about it, these are mental shackles. And again, if we're going to use the dissensus as as metaphorical space here, as a way to understand the human condition of
Right.
being in darkness, of being in spiritual darkness, of being in shackles, again, spiritual shackles,
Mm-hmm.
right? What does it say that they do? And this is all, anyone who wants to look at the super gospel, for example, I put that up. That's in Passion 1, I believe. And these are all the events leading up to his resurrection. So he enters into Hades. That's in the Acts of Pontius Pilate, in a
Yep.
section called the Dissensus, for anyone who wants to know. But that's available in the Super Gospel if you want to read it. And I pieced together the various languages and the different versions of it in such a way that it's more or less straightforward and readable and understandable. But again, this is all metaphorical space. When David says, well, okay, when they say open up your gates, right? Again, spiritual gates, the eye gate, the ear gate, the
Right.
heart gate, the all of these different openings, right? And
Right.
let him in, right?
Mhm.
It's
And
not
it's
so hard. It's not so hard to understand once you realize that that's what it's telling you.
right.
And when the prophets start talking to one another, again, in a metaphorical sense, because again, how does this apply to us? How does this knowledge help us? How does this bear on what we are teaching, right? It has to do with putting what this prophet says together with what that prophet says, with what that prophet says, and then you get the unitary thought. They prophesied this stuff, right?
Right.
But it happens at the darkest moment, if you will, that he comes in and he destroys Hades, he destroys Satan, right? Casts him into the underworld, and he brings Adam and all of his descendants up into the heavens above, and other people let themselves out, and they go around Jerusalem or whatever, obviously freaking people out. That's in the canon.
Yeah.
You know,
It-
that's canonical. That's in Matthew. It straight up says that they showed themselves to the people there.
right.
That was something, well, do you believe that? You know what I'm saying? So again, you eat what's placed before you. These are things that they may not know about, all the dissensus and stuff like that, but there are places in the scripture where it talks about he went to preach to the spirits in prison.
Yep.
I'm saying, so there's witnesses to these events. Now, the natural mind, and I get it, because having again come from that background, the natural mind is always looking for like ways to discredit things, and to eliminate these things. And I get it. But the secret language is the key. Once you realize that these people were all speaking that same language, then you don't need the boundaries of the canon anymore. They all disappear. That's like the number one enlightenment that you get from understanding the mystery, is that those walls are gone. Those barriers are gone. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
that completely undermines the church, because their entire basis is quote unquote the church authority. The doctrines and the decrees or whatever that led them to form that canon selectively based on quote unquote their own authority,
Right.
right? Where is their authority? Again, someone doesn't have the authority to make 1 + 1 = 3. If you follow what I'm saying,
Right.
it doesn't equal 3. It makes no sense. People can say it, people can enforce it, but it's like any illusion. Once you see through the illusion, it's like you cannot unsee it. It's like once you recognize the truth of any sort, it's true that you can lose sight of something. It's true that you can shift your focus off of that onto something else. You could always walk out of, this way of life and turn your back on it if you choose, Luke Skywalker style or whatever, you could just turn your back on it. But it's still there. And, your acceptance of it or your rejection of it doesn't change the fact that it's there. And, your denial of it doesn't change the fact that it's there. And so the falsehood doesn't have any authority over truth. Worldly power doesn't have any power over the truth. If the truth is there, it's there. And like I said, I'm trying to open up people's eyes. I'm trying to open up people's ears. I'm trying to open up their minds and their hearts and their understanding. And again, this is all entailed in what, for example, the gospel of truth calls the unitary thought. You have to be able to put everything together onto one structure, one edifice, one understanding, right? This is how I was able to piece together the super gospel. The presumption was it was either going to succeed or it was going to fail. And the quote unquote test that I put it to was I forced it to either succeed or fail. In other words, it either was or was not true, logically. If it were true, then it should form together something that was coherent enough to read from beginning to end without a severe contradiction that was anything beyond what we already accept. In terms of differences in scriptures, in terms of differences in numbers, in terms of variance, in terms of, what I'm saying? If we didn't hold a double standard, it basically held the same water that our canonical scriptures did. And so I try to be honest with myself about it. I never came across a place where it was utterly impossible to do. But sometimes you had to think this and that and not this instead of that. If you're, again, what does Paul say? His answer is yes. You know what I'm saying? It isn't yes and no. It's yes. So it's not like it's this and that. It's like if something is true, it came from the place of truth. If somebody speaks that language came from a place of understanding. Yeah. And whether or not somebody wants to think of something as quote unquote literally true, if it's spiritually true, they need to hear with those ears and they need to see with those eyes. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. It's a little bit blurred. I got to admit, you take a book like Revelation, for example, and it's easy to say that when he's talking about the great whore of Babylon or whatever, he's not talking about some actual person. He's using visual. He's using, in fact, that's what the book itself says, that it's a, what does he say? He's signified it, right? Which basically is a term that means to signify it, maybe. He's put everything in signs and symbols and stuff. I think of scriptures as being sort of signifying things. I
remember the series. You explain it very well, like the way that, like the linear fashion. Like I've never heard somebody talk about the Revelation that way, where you go to a certain point and then you start over again. So like you go to a certain point and then it starts over again. A lot of people talk about Revelation as like even linear, like fully linear. But you were talking about how it keeps starting over at a certain sign. Like you see a sign and then you start over, and you see a sign and then you start over. And so that's what I'm reminded of when you say signify.
But this is what is meant by quote unquote gnosis, knowledge. It doesn't have anything to do. I shouldn't say it has nothing to do with belief. I believe this stuff myself, for example. I'm pretty straightforward about that too. A person could accuse me of being biased or whatever. I could totally understand that, because I have to confess, I believe it. All right.
Right.
But I'm putting it out there. I wouldn't put something out there, just to cash in or whatever. I'm not, it almost, and people get me for being too detached and being too sort of, how should I say, I don't want to say blasé about it, but just sort of matter of fact about it,
Yeah.
approaching it Ben Stein style, you know what I'm saying? It just, to me, the truth is the truth is the truth. And you don't have to make it super sexy or whatever. It is what it is.
I know
You
what
know
you
what
mean.
I'm saying? And to me, it's very cut and dried. Um, so, but again, that also doesn't preclude the fact that other people out there might have a gift. They might be, how shall I say, uh, um, um, they they might have a sort of a charm or a gift of gab or something that I don't have. They may be a little more presentable than I am. You know what I'm saying?
I know what
They
you
can
mean.
always carry the torch, because again, I hate to keep saying this. The reason why we have a common language, the reason why we have a common understanding is so we have a common goal and common action and common responsibility. I have a responsibility once I knew. You have a responsibility once you knew,
Right.
right? Every single one of us has the responsibility to share what we know. Um, so that sort of implies, the necessity for each one of us to study and to grow in order to share and to share more and to share more forcefully and to share more clearly what we know. For me, this was both an instantaneous process and a long-term sort of process. There's been a lot of refinements in what it is that I believe, but that's true of anybody who's learning. That's true of anybody. I mean, I would hate to think that if you were a doctor, you knew everything you needed to know by the time you were 30 and didn't learn a thing after that. You know what I'm saying? I would think that you'd keep up, and I would think that you'd know, and I would think that your experience would tell you, you know what I'm saying? So, but I've had very little in the way of correction. I've had mostly in terms of refinement. So, after really 30 years of being into this stuff, I'm able to be a lot more glib about it, because to me it's very straightforward, matter of fact. I can go through and explain things, and sometimes I can. I'm not the most articulate person. People said the same thing about Paul, by the way. They said, "Oh, he writes these very weighty letters, and he comes across as being something, but then you meet him, it's like, you know." I mean, and I don't mean that as an insult, but
I
that
know what
was
you mean.
what he said.
Yeah.
So I get that. You know what I'm saying? But it doesn't change the fact that he was a hard worker, that he was out there putting his life at risk. He was out there putting his, limb at risk. He was out there, putting it out there, you know? And so once he realized his mistake, and once he realized what he had done, and once he realized that he needed to stop kicking against the pricks, so to speak, and get his act together and
Yeah.
get on board, the Jesus train here, you know what I'm saying? He was fully committed, and that's the thing. It's about commitment. But again, the commitment is secondary, but the idea is, once you've opened people's eyes, once your eyes are open, I should say, you have the responsibility or whatever to pursue it. And once you've gotten to a certain level of point, because this is for the kingdom, this isn't about me. Nothing goes through me. The truth doesn't go through anybody. The truth is the truth is the truth is the truth. It's there, and it's not, what I'm saying? It's hidden, because again, it's couched in earthly terms. You could go back and read the whole Bible like this. If you go back and read Genesis, for example, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? Well, what if that means the heavenly and the earthly? What about that? And
Right.
you shift it to that paradigm, all of a sudden it reads entirely differently. There was the heavenly level and there was the earthly level, and the earthly level was essentially without form and void, and darkness was on the face or the surface of the deep. And you read it like that, all of a sudden it becomes almost an apocalypse. It almost becomes a revelation of what has happened,
Yeah.
as opposed to a creation story, quote unquote. It's very eye-opening to look at that. In fact, I might do a treatment of that if there's any interest in pursuing that. But the
Yeah.
idea
I want to
that,
hear that.
but that being said, it's because if you put on that lens, you can see things through that lens. I'm just trying to get people to see. I'm not asking people to believe anything. I'm trying to bring a horse to water here, so to speak. Get them to look at what's being said. But that's what I'm saying. If you see it and I see it, your listeners see it, my listeners see it, then it becomes a common understanding.
Well, you don't really have to force people to believe this stuff. Like, I don't force anybody to believe this stuff on my channel. I just read the text, and the text explains itself out, because all you have to do, like, this is what I do on my channel, for instance. Like, the fact that all you have to do is show people the apocryphal text and then show them that it's in the canon. People don't realize that. Like, a lot of people don't realize what David, what Isaiah, what Jeremiah are talking about in the verses where they are quoted in the harrowing of hell. They give their own testimonies of, this is what I said when I was on the earth. This is what I said when I was on the earth. And even that is metaphoric, because they're saying it when they were on the earth, which then they're talking about it like in the heavenly manner. Or even the fact that what you're talking about, the fact that it says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That's talking about that in Revelation. So we're living that right now, in a sense. We're living the fact that this will not, like, the devil will not prevail against this teaching. But yet, it happens in the Gospel of Nicodemus. So it happens during that dark time, and way back 2,000 years ago, but we're living it now, in a sense, if that makes sense.
That's the prison that they're in.
Right.
The idea that the prophets aren't speaking to one another in their minds, in their hearts, in their thoughts. Again, it as a function of metaphorical space, we all live in our own underworld, so to speak, because we're in the fog of war. There's this heavenly conflict between the truth and the falsehood, the understanding and the error, right? And this has been going on for a very long time. Like it speaks of in the Gospel of Truth, they were in a fog as regards, the truth, that they were stumbling, bumbling around. Gospel of Thomas, they were drunk. They need to shake off their wine. I mean, the metaphor is used a million different ways, but the idea is that your confusion, and again, it's like saying the same thing over and over again, because and that's part of the reason why it's like, I get out there and I just say the same things, and I'm telling myself that it's just the same thing. Right. It's just I could do it out of Matthew, I could do it out of Jude, I could do it out of Paul, I could do it out of Genesis, I could do it out of Philip, I could do it out of Thomas. How many different ways you got to hear this? You know what I'm saying? It's like it's just there. And it, to me, it's just like, open up your eyes and look, it's right there. I want to give you spiritual eyes with which to see. I want to give you spiritual ears with which to hear. The prisoners in that metaphorical space, the quote unquote prisoners, and we're all prisoners until we're set free of this world. Right. By that, I mean, of course, the understanding that this world gives us. Babylon falls because we're like, we're not going to do business with you anymore. We're not going to buy your stuff anymore. We're not going to participate in any of this mess that you're putting forward anymore. We hate you, right? And again, that's a pretty strong rebuke, but that's essentially what it says. We cast it off. We say to hell with it, Right. But I mean, just straight up, that's where we got to be. And when are we going to have had a belly full of this? If we're in metaphorically, if we're talking about the underworld as being a metaphor for this darkness, this present age in which we live, and you see that the apostles and the prophets and the disciples and all the inhabitants of hell, of the underworld, who were kept in by the gates of hell, which is to say, the idea of the canon is a gate. The idea that we're just sitting on our hands and waiting for something to happen, is a shackle. We need to take our shackles off and produce works with our hands, right? We need to then turn around and take the shackles off of other people. I've unshackled your feet. I've unshackled your hands. Now you can go around. Now you can do works. I've loosed your tongue. I've opened up your eyes. Now you can, you can speak the truth. Now you can again, for somebody who's been in the game as long as I have, to me, this is just like, I just keep saying it, like I said, the same things over and over again. And I sometimes wonder if I'm not spinning my wheels, because where is this going? I don't know what kind of organization, what kind of outreach, whatever, but there's people out there who are good at that. There are people out there who could do something, who could make this change or whatever. But the first thing comes with us. We have to educate ourselves, and we have to become aware, and we have to become lights to the world, to become ambassadors, to extend the olive branch, so to speak. I mean, you heard Paul and you heard Apollos and you heard all these people. They went from house to house to house. They had prayer meetings. They held vigils together. They spoke of these mysteries. And yeah, like even, again, I hate to say it, but just for the sake of other people, there is a spirit of prophecy. Sometimes you just put your hand to the plow and the work will sort of just happen. Sometimes you open up your mouth and the words will just kind of come out, but that's what we're promised. That's what it says. Don't think about what you're going to say. Just do it. At the time, you will be given that. And that's where you got to be. You got to be on the razor's edge as far as that's concerned. A lot of times I don't do a lot of prep because that would get in the way of the flow.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? That would get in the way of inspiration. You know what I'm saying? And I hate to use that term, but I'm not talking about myself or for myself. I'm talking about all of us.
Right, but I've learned everything that I essentially, the Holy Spirit did it, but I've learned what I've learned from you and from a few other people, very select few other people. So in a sense, what you're saying, and pardon me, but maybe you were meant to be the hard drive where the information is stored, and other people are like the RAM in the computer or something like that. Like maybe you're the one that needed to be that solid, information that gets out to the people because let me tell you this, Robert. I literally have people that tell me, I used to be in jail. I used to be a heroin addict. I used to be this. I used to be that. And they are literally taking this information, and it's all they want to do now is learn this information. They believe it. They know it to be true, and it's getting out there. So it is happening as we speak. I've seen it happen. Number one, no, I did not believe this could ever happen when I first started listening to you. I knew it would come someday, but I didn't think it would come at this time or this level, especially with what we're going through as a nation and as a world right now. I didn't think it would come right now. I thought it honestly would come a little sooner, but whatever God's plan is, it's happening as we speak. So I really think you're doing what you're meant to do.
Yeah, and I keep saying this too. It's a spirit. All I want is all any of us should want is for this to get out. That's the thing. And it's always, always, always in the plural. I'm not saying this out of some, place of humility or even false humility. I'm saying this out of the sheer fact that it's always talking about us in the plural. It's always talking about us, right? Because this is us. He is going to use us. It's going to take the multitude of the wise. You know what I'm saying? So I wish people would look to themselves and credit themselves a little bit and have a little something that they brought to the table, that they unearthed, that they uncovered, that they contribute. I mean, everybody should bring a piece here. Everybody has a blessing. Everybody has a talent. Everybody has a gift. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I don't want it to be about me. I don't want it to be about any particular person. It's not, it's like I said, 1 and 1 just is 2. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Who does that go through? That doesn't go through anybody, just is there. And these people, they laid these mysteries down for us at the end of time. Yeah. They gave us this stuff because they could see, they knew. Like when we talk about Moses and Elijah being at the transfiguration, and here the Gospel of Philip talks about this too. It talks about how when the disciples were there, they were able to see them in their exalted state because they themselves were in that exalted state.
Yep.
Because in that other place, what you see, you become. They saw their holiness and they were holy, and technically they became holy in order that they could see that.
Right.
So they were also in that exalted place. That's what this book says. And that makes sense because, again, human beings are angels. That's what it says. They shall be like the angels.
Right.
And I hate to even use the term gods, but Jesus said, look, you guys are offended at that.
Right.
But
I know. I use
that's
that
what
all
the
the time.
Bible does,
Lowercase
right?
g. I know. I say it all the time.
So you have to understand. I mean, I don't want to sound new agey here or quote unquote Gnostic here. Okay, I'm talking about real knowledge. I'm talking about meat here. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? I'm
Jesus
not
said it
talking
though.
about some area. Well, again, it's a chicken or egg kind of thing. You see because you're in that elevated state. You reach that elevated state because you can see.
Right.
But the idea is that once you have eyes to see, once you have ears to hear, once you've thrown off your shackles, when you open up your mouth and you have the mind of Christ, you see then Christ becomes your speech, becomes your mouth, and it speaks through you because you become a conduit, you become a vessel. You become great by surrendering, by yielding, right?
Mhm.
By just allowing it, right? Like I talked about the gospel. I don't take any credit for that. I facilitated that,
Right.
right? I facilitated it. You know, I let it be what it wanted to be, and that's what it ended up. I was very passive as far as that was concerned. So all of my activity, there's a lot of paradox in it. You know, you do by not doing. You
I know.
know, you speak by not preparing. You
Yeah, but
know,
that's why God probably chose you is because you're not flashy. You know what I'm saying? Because look how many people are flashy and they get nothing, like you said. You know what I mean? Like you chose the
I don't
vessel.
want to hold us back. This is
Yeah.
for, again, I don't mean to sound like a bad, try to understand what I'm saying here. This is beyond any one of us. This is the shining through of the truth. This is the shining through of the Spirit. Anybody who understands what we're saying, you and I, because, you know, again, a lot of times we talk, we're almost finishing each other's sentences. Why? Because
Right.
we're on the same page. We share the same understanding. Yeah, I might have been the one who spoke it, and you might have heard it, but now
Yep.
that you hear it, you open up your mouth and you come up with it. You see what I'm
Exactly.
saying? You pass
Yeah.
it along. You
Right.
take in that one little light, you know, and you put your little candle up to it and you took it. Right
Right.
now you've got a candle that's lit. That's true for everybody. Everybody has to do something, you know, and I'm sorry, some people out there like to just be passive, you
Right.
know, and I get that, but
But
you
can I
gotta,
mention can I mention one thing, Robert? I know it's not off topic, but it's not necessarily the things that you teach, but I've been teaching it recently on my channel. Is when Satan was cast out of heaven, he was cast out of heaven for not bowing to the image of Adam, made in God's image. Adam was made from dust in God's image, and Satan was cast out of heaven. So the fact that Jesus says to the Pharisees, why are you getting mad at me for saying I'm the Son of God when it says in your scriptures that ye are gods, like lowercase g, like you were talking about us being angels? That maybe that's in a sense what this is all about, because God, Jesus being God, said, he was a foot washer, and the greatest among us would be foot washers like him. Like you're the real. He really was the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But he came to wash feet and to heal the leprous and to do all these amazing things. So he's
yeah,
saying the greatest among you will do these things as well. So what he's teaching us is not to try to exalt ourselves like Satan did by saying he wanted to raise himself above, God's throne, but to be humble. If you are made in his image and you are God's lowercase g and you are angels and you are this higher thing, then to be humble by knowing it. And essentially that's what you're saying, is just to be humble and let it flow through you. Let the Holy Spirit flow through you and share it with others, because by sharing it, you're showing that you're not arrogant and you're not like the devil and you're not like this age that tried to make us so belittled and not to believe something that is true, that we are lowercase g. We are gods, and God wants us to know who we are. He says, if you know yourself, then you'll know like the beginning and the end and all these things that he speaks of in Thomas and things like that. So
well, what if you had bread to give? What if you had wine to give? What if you had the Holy Spirit to give? What if you had scriptures to give? Right? And you
right,
gave and you gave and it kept coming.
right,
You know, you didn't run out.
like
And
feeding the flat.
there's plenty for everybody.
Right,
If you give, you will pull from an unbounded. You will keep pulling out bread. It's going to always be there. You will keep pouring out wine. You know what I'm saying? You will keep giving out fishes. You see what I'm saying?
yep,
it will be eternal, because it comes from a place that knows no limits. It knows no bounds. You're just a conduit. You're just a servant. That's all of us, right? But when I say just that, wasn't Jesus a servant? Wasn't he a conduit? Wasn't, that's the way. It is the way. You have to, that just is the way.
Yep.
And that's the thing. It look, there aren't, it's not about personalities. It's not about who, it's about being in that servitude and allowing, the Spirit to become, become you. You know what I'm saying? It's a fine line, because when you try too hard, it becomes about you and your efforts and stuff like that.
Right.
If your mind is focused, like when I was putting together the super gospel, I never ever thought that I was imposing anything on anything, because again, like I said, that to me was my own journey that I was on. That was what I did it for, and it sounds kind of, impersonal or whatever. I did it for myself. I wrote it for myself. I wanted to see it. So I wasn't going to lie to myself. I wasn't going to, try to, bend the rules. Why would I spend years out of my life trying to, to create something
make it fit where it didn't.
Yeah.
I know
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it was only because other people started like, oh yeah, I want to, do you have a copy of that or whatever? It's like, well, no, but I know. I guess I could probably try to publish it. But it was kind of an afterthought. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't think, oh, well, maybe this would be great if this were a book. And the story there, by the way, was I did try to sell it. I did get a publisher, an agent. Publishers rejected the heck out of it. And then I tried to put it into like used bookstores or whatever. And I'd go in there 2 months later, it'd still be on the shelf. People weren't interested in it. Wow. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it was harsh. I ended up buying one back just because I wanted to have it, and I felt bad that after like a year, it was still sitting there, and nobody bought it. Right. So, I mean, but again, I don't want to say pearls before swine, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
People are not, how can I put it? And that was maybe 10 years ago too. I think a lot of things have changed. This has become more pervasive. People are reading the Book of Enoch. If I was to really want success on my channel, I would probably be all Enoch all the time, because that seems to be what everybody wants. That's where the money's at, so to speak, right? The money's not talking about the gospel of Philip or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And I'm speaking like that, just in colloquial terms.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Coming from, what I'm saying? I'm not tailoring what I'm teaching to the idea of popularity. If this is not a smart business move, I'll put it that way.
Right.
And don't take any offense, but I mean, and I'm just, again, I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I imagine that this video, for example, like most of my other videos, will be somewhat successful. I imagine at the end of the day, if this is on my channel, and I'm just guessing here, that it'll end up being somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 views lifetime. And you'll get, a view every day or every other day or whatever after a certain point. It will be eclipsed. Now, that's me being negative. That's me being cynical. But I'm also judging that based on past performance, which again, I'm just telling you that I understand that people aren't flocking to this, right? People aren't, there are a small number of people. This is Gideon's army here. The ones that are here are the diehards. So, I'm glad for that, because you've got a different sort of person, I think, interested in this. It doesn't have the wide sort of mass appeal or whatever, or something else.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Like, I'll call you one among 1,000 and two among 10,000. It's very limited.
And that's fine. You know what? I'll tell you what, that's fine, because I'd rather have those guys than 10,000 other people who are less, attuned to these things. But
Right.
that, again, that underscores, this is, again, not for my sake, and I'm not even complaining, I'm just saying,
I know what you're
because
saying. I
it's
deal with it all the time.
important for people to understand that I do things because I think they're important and because I think there's a message there, not because they're successful or not successful. You know, so I'm shooting myself in the foot every time I put out a gospel of Philip or a gospel of truth or a gospel of anything, understanding Paul, understanding it. I'm absolutely shooting myself in the foot. You know, if I did readings, that's what has the mass appeal. I'll put it that way.
Right.
If I do a reading of a book, that has a much greater chance of going viral, getting, and I know that, and I get that. But again, that's not what this is about. I'm trying to give people eyes to see and ears to hear, you know, and I'm not patting myself on the back or whatever. I'm doing largely what I want to do. I'm altogether too honest as a person. I'm altogether too straightforward sometimes, but I'll level with you. You
Yeah.
know, a lot of this stuff, quote unquote, isn't worth my time. But and again, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, because I know that it's going to die at some point. It's
Right.
going to go into the video graveyard, of forgotten things,
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying, and don't get me wrong. Anybody who's out there listening to me, I'm only saying that because I'm a realist, right?
Right.
But if people actually internalize this, people who have way more, how shall I say, charisma, or way more business acumen, or way more whatever, they can make a lot more out of this if they
Right.
wanted to, and they should, because if they see it, then the world needs to see it. If they understand it, then the world needs to understand it. That's really my only point, is that people need to bring their own gifts to bear. They need to bring their own actions to bear on this information and use it,
Yeah.
because it has to spread, and it has to get, out there. And like I said, it's unitary in nature. It's a unitary thought. It's a unitary measure. Um, this means this here. It means it all the way across the board. That's quite the revelation. It's also quite the burden to have to flesh that out and to have to prove that. Because how many of these scriptures are there?
A
There's
lot.
tons of it. Like, I would never be able to go through all this. Don't get me wrong. Again, this is not coming from a place of complaint, but I've got a family. I've got responsibilities. I've got a lawn to mow. I've got a job to go to. I have things that I have to keep up with in my work and my job and stuff. It chews up a lot of my time. I'm at home. I have to devote time to my family. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? It's just I'm in the thick of things myself, you know? And so for me to even have a little bit of time, then I got to study, then I got to listen, then what I'm saying? So I only have a limited time to produce works. But if I can do a little bit and you can do a little bit, which I know you do,
Right.
and other people do something, and other people do something, and I'm seeing this a lot. I am so impressed. There are people out there reading these books. I'm finding new books read out all the time. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It brings kind of a smile to my face when I see other people producing works, and it encourages me when I see other people speaking the language and using the language and promoting the understanding of it, because that's when I know that it's made a difference. And like what you said, I hear things sometimes that I can't even believe, because I make a very clean sort of detachment between myself and this message. I just see myself as, like, if I was buffing off a Ferrari or something like that, I mean, it's not me, it's the Ferrari. You know what I'm saying? This
Right.
is what's impressive. The truth there is what is impressive. And that's what people need to see. Because when they see that, right, they're able to do something with that, you know. But we need to be kind of an army. You need to think in terms of the army of the elect.
Right.
The body, if you will. That may be more palatable, but you know what I'm saying. We're soldiers in this fight. We're bringing it to the world. But again, it's a gospel. It's good news. You
Right.
know, And just like I said, Moses and the prophets brought us the Old Testament. Jesus and the apostles brought us the New Testament. And the elect are to bring the final revelation, the third piece, right? The third item that's in the Ark of the Covenant, the hidden manna.
Which is a
Right.
word, but a lot of people don't talk about they assume that, I don't know why they assume this, but they always assume that the Holy Spirit, when it was prophesied by Jesus to come, the Comforter will come, they assumed that it was just like a figment or a phantom or something like that. But God always brought a word. He brought the law through Moses, then he brought Jesus himself, and then the third is all the books that were removed, which, like I mentioned at the beginning of this show, the virgin documents, the ones that were never touched, in a sense, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. But
what eye has not seen, what ear has not heard, what
yeah,
hand has not touched, and what has not entered into the heart of men. This is all of those things, right? Spiritual eyes hadn't seen this before. Spiritual ears hadn't heard this before because, again, we were in the time of the interim. We were
right,
in the time where the children of Jezebel, so to speak, which is what we were being killed, quote unquote, spiritually with death, quote unquote, which is to say the state of not being able to see, hear, think, whatever in proper terms. And so we were in a spiritual death, and so that was the time of the interim. But what I'm saying is the light is shining forth. The day is dawning. The morning star, quote unquote, like which Jesus says, if you overcome, he says in Revelation, I will give you the morning star, right? That is arising in our hearts as it speaks of in Peter, as it witnesses in Peter, 2 Peter. But you know what I'm saying? It's just the idea that we are lights, that we are spiritual physicians, so to speak, and that the work is really all of us and all of our friends and whatever, that we, to whatever extent we are possible, we put ourselves out there and we manifest this,
right,
because the message is what's important. Paul speaks of that. It's not about Paul. It's not about Apollos or whatever. It's about the truth. And what I'm saying? That's so that everybody will see they have a role to play. That's vital, because the way that you activate the Spirit is by putting your hand to the plow. By putting one foot in front of the other. By stepping out and maybe sticking your neck out a little bit. And getting in the game.
right,
And that's the thing. Everybody needs to get in this game. Everybody needs to, first of all, learn, and second of all, do an outreach of some sort. And like I said, everybody's gifted in their own way. Some people can draw. Some people can sing. Some people can write. Some people can read. Some people, there's so many things that we as people, we need to be looking to ourselves and thinking, what can I contribute? How can I manifest? Because the thing about it is, as movements grow, they become more and more visible.
right,
And for people who say, well, all these people can't be wrong, right? Look at all the people who believe this way, and you just got a handful of people over here believing that way. The more of them that they see, right, the less that they can fall back on that as an excuse. When there's thousands of people believing it, when there's hundreds of thousands of people believing it, when there's millions of people believing it, when there's tens of millions of people believing it, the more people start believing in it and seeing it, because again, you see it, and that helps you to believe it, and then that belief helps you to see it, and it feeds on itself. Because again, anytime you learn something, anytime you shift paradigms and you actually become awake and you recognize something, the seeing fuels the believing, fuels the seeing, fuels the believing. It's a cycle.
right,
I'm saying, and each one of us needs to be on that cycle. What I'm saying is integral to that is, if you're going to prophesy, you got to open up your mouth. If you're going to produce works, you've got to put your hand to the plow. Not to sound like a broken record, but what I'm saying is, it's the doing of it.
yep,
It's the practice of it. That's why it's so important. This is why it has to really boil down to, everybody needs to look to themselves and what they can do, what they can contribute. because this isn't about me. This is about the people who laid down their lives. You read in the book of Revelation, all the saints under the altar, and what are they waiting for? They're waiting for us, what I'm saying, to, in a sense, suffer the same fate as them or whatever, and for that age to be over, and for us to then to transition to where we can make use of their sacrifice.
Right.
We can benefit from their sacrifice, because they laid down their mysteries for us to find, knowing that we were going to enter into a stage of spiritual death, and subsequently the spiritual resurrection. That's the payoff. This is us giving them their due. You know what I'm saying? Because it was they who led the way. It was they who sacrificed themselves. It was they who wrote these things down for us to discover. You know what I'm saying? And so for us to repay them, we have to pay it off.
Right. Makes sense.
So anyway, I mean, I don't know if this is telling anybody anything new. This is just kind of, a rally, I guess, a rally call for all of us to, sort of, as I say, open up their mouth and speak, to put their hand to the plow and work, and to do our due diligence to spread the message. Because again, if we're going to strike while the iron is hot, I think that people are looking to the sky. They're looking to God. What is the resolution here? We've been given a gift. We've been given an inheritance. We've been given something of true substance to share. And so by all means, share. And by all means, you know what I'm saying, be substantive,
Right.
to give people what really will cure their spiritual illness, what really will cure their spiritual blindness, that will really cure and clear out, if you will, the spiritual fog that we are in, that this age is over and it's done with, and we are done with it. And again, it won't be done until we're done with it. We have to cast it off. We have to see through it. We need to be able to say that the emperor has no clothes, and that includes the church. They may be defensive, but the thing is, we're on their side. We're trying to save the world, so to speak. I mean, it sounds grandiose, but I mean, that's what it is. We're out there trying to make it, let the truth be known.
Right.
And by manifesting the truth, then the truth becomes ever more omnipresent. It becomes ever more familiar.
But it's prophesied to happen, though, not only by Enoch, but also the fact that Peter entered the tomb first and John didn't. So John does allow Peter to figure this out, and all we can do.
It's deference. Yeah, absolutely. But
all that's we can do until then is help.
Those are instructions. You see what I'm saying? But again, I may have pointed this out, but you get it, right? You've internalized that. You see that, right? That John is deferent to Peter. It's there for instructions. Right. It's telling us what to do, right? And again, that's another discussion for another day, but it bears on what we're saying here. It's easy to say you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. We don't want to be adversarial. We want to be accommodating to these people. We need to let them see what the truth is. And the way that we're going to get there is, again, so we get our act together. We get our eyes and we start seeing. We get our ears and we start hearing. We get our mouths and we start speaking, right? We have to manifest first, and we have to be the example. And to me, that's impeccable. Who's going to criticize us for being honest and truthful? I mean, yeah, of course, you're going to get pushback, but that's to be expected. But the thing about it is, and the thing that I think about every time I think, oh man, I've been at this for 20 years now. I've been on YouTube since 2007, so we're talking about like 13, 14 years now.
Yeah.
That I've been pushing this on YouTube with some degree of success, mind you. I'm super grateful for that. But we're still waiting on the breakthrough. We're still waiting on that critical mass, right? And it's not for me to say when that should be. I just think that the way forward is for people to take to manifest and to be a witness. Because again, one or two people saying something, it takes an army. It takes a whole slew of people. But again, it is the multitude of the wise that is the safety of the world. It is the fact that we're going to need to have tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of people able to articulate this stuff. And the more articulate we can be, which you're pretty articulate about it, you could explain this stuff. I should let you do more of the talking. I mean, I should practice what I preach here. But at the same time, that it's the next step. To get our house in order, so to speak, to get our story straight. And that all comes through the proper understanding of the unity of purpose and the unity of thought. It was all meant to be laid down. It was all meant to be encoded, to be decoded by those of us who would come along at the end. And those of us who are here were put here, as it speaks of in the gospel of truth, as something that would come into being, not something that didn't exist, but that existed at a time that was to be. And this is that time.
I really need you sometimes though, Robert, to be yourself, because you're sort of a compass, because I've found that my strength is to articulate the difference between the earthly and the heavenly. But you stay so on the heavenly level that it keeps me on course, because sometimes I go to, because especially like I mentioned, I came from a Christian school and a Christian upbringing. So sometimes my mind strays towards the earthly, and then I just touch on the heavenly, but I really need to be able to go back and forth and stay on course on each side of the fence, if that makes sense, and you help me do that. So I appreciate it.
Well, again, I'm glad to help in whatever way I can. I'll concede that. I mean, I'm proud of, I think, the kinds of contributions I've been able to make, but I recognize that were it not for the platform that is available to me, were it not for these source materials being made available through, how should I say, the people who compiled these things and gathered them and translated them and did all the really heavy lifting as far as this is concerned, everything is set in place. It's like the field is ripe for harvest, and all we got to do is get out there and harvest. Right? We have entered into their works, right? And that's what's important for all of us to recognize, that we've only entered into the works of other people, and that's great, because it keeps everybody's ego in check. It keeps everybody with the right perspective. You're servant, you are, and I don't care. It doesn't matter. I don't mind being a servant. You know what I'm saying? In fact, it's very liberating in a lot of ways to be the servant, rather than the one to lord it over other people or whatever, because there's more fruit in it, and there's more. It's more spiritual to be that way, to wash the other people's feet.
It also helps me a lot to remember when I'm tired, or when I don't feel like doing a show, or I don't feel like reading specifically, or something like that. Just the way your earthly tiredness or whatever, it helps me to remember that people died for this, like the people that were before us, that in a sense were probably a little more holy in their lives and a little more righteous in their lives than I am, that they died for these things, and they got thrown into Nero's pits and different things like that for what we're dealing with right now. So it was a gift that we should honor. So
and again, this is why it was so important to get rid of the martyrs, and they extended the false understanding as sort of a way to give people an out when it comes to martyrdom, when it comes to suffering, when it comes to persecution, etc. They were like, look, we're going to have the church. We're just going to have it this way. We're going to have the body, so to speak, but it's an imitation. It's a dead body, so to speak. And I don't mean that out of any disrespect, but in terms of spiritual meaning, if you're not spiritual, if you don't have the spiritual understanding, spiritually speaking, you're spiritually dead.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And they gave them what they thought was life, because again, like what we were reading in Philip, they ascribed the names to things that the they took from what was true and made it false. By hiding the heavenly in the earthly, it made it so that those who followed the earthly understanding would be, in a sense, trapped by that. That it was a mind trick, so to speak, but it was one that was sanctioned. I mean, it was something that God Himself designed. In other words, the words are identical, the meanings are not.
Right.
But you could read it one way, or you could read it another way. You could read it with the physical eyes, or you could read it with the spiritual eyes, right? So it's like, well, if you then get those spiritual eyes, and you then get those spiritual ears, you recognize that there's two ways of reading this. You can easily see how people were kept down.
Right.
You can easily see how people were fooled, so to speak. And that's another thing this book talks about too. They fooled them. They tricked them. Gospel of truth, same thing. They were led to believe something that was not true. They were in a fog as concerning the truth, the mystery, the hidden meaning. And that's what the definition of something hidden basically means. It's there. You just can't see it. It's like an illusion. It's like mental shackles. It's like spiritual shackles. It's all of those things. But knowledge is key. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. That's a canonical thought, right? So again, for people who say, well, I'm not into gnosis. I'm not into knowledge. Yeah, you should be, because Jesus said you should be. And that's right there in your own scripture. So again, you can just eat what they lay before you and still heal them. Because
he said people are destroyed for a lack of it. And if you were reading the Greek originally, that would be gnosis. My people are destroyed for a lack of gnosis. That's what he said.
What's the corollary? You're built up through that.
Right.
Right. You're restored through that. Right. That would be the correlative thought. That would be what the
how do you become not destroyed? Yeah. Like,
well, what else?
How do you fix yourself? Through knowledge.
But it's spiritual knowledge. Again, people try to make it something, I think, that it both kind of is and both kind of isn't. Again, I don't want to get into the whole new agey aspect of it, but it is a spiritual awakening. We are spiritual beings. We have an angelic nature. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to happen, but at some point, we are going to become like Stephen. We are going to start to become a different kind of thing.
Right.
And
but isn't that what we're hoping for, though? We're not going to always be in the flesh, whether that's a metaphoric sense or a spiritual sense. We will not always be this way. Someday we will get bathed in the Archersian lake by Michael, and we will be where we can rest on the Sabbath day finally. Like, we can't do it now. So that's our hope. That's our blessed hope, is that someday we will be able to be spiritual beings that don't have this flesh anymore. And if this is something that we can teach until that day happens, then we're leading people at least on the path to righteousness, I think, and not this falseness that the churches have instituted.
Well, yeah, and that's the key. We break free from the chains that they put us in, and we become different by showing people the truth. We give them the chance to transcend, I guess, themselves, and in becoming transcendent of an illusion, you start to walk outside of that illusion. You start to think outside of that particular box, that particular prison, whatever sort of metaphor you want to apply to it. And the Bible gives us many metaphors for it, but it is shackles. And to be honest with you, to be great in this world is to be in the greatest of all shackles that there are. You're completely consumed by the ego at that point. And this is about transcendence of that. That's why servitude is so great, because it's a direct way to subvert the ego and to eliminate the you have to lose yourself to find yourself, so to speak. Let them be right. Let God be true. You know what I'm saying? Let the people who did the heavy lifting, let them receive the credit. Let them receive the glory. And I guarantee you every single one of them would say the same thing. Let God have the glory.
Yeah, Barnabas said that. Barnabas said that I feel so happy to be able to speak to souls such as yours, and like the way that he talks to us in the future you can tell he's talking to you in the future, and he's saying, I'm so happy that I could, and he says, I can write to you this trifle, but his trifle is able, the epistle of Barnabas, which he calls a trifle, is something that can literally get rid of the entire food law like basis, which has built up the Jewish and the Muslim faith upon food laws that really are about people, which is ridiculous that no one knows that. Even in modern day Christianity, they still think the food laws are about food instead of people.
Well, and again, what's remarkable about that book is actually and that was sort of my guiding light too, because that was one of the first books that really impressed me out of all the lost books of the Bible was the Epistle of Barnabas. That was a real mind blower to me. But some of the things that impressed me about it was the way that he came across as, hey, I'm not a teacher. I'm just one of you. I'm out there learning. And that sort of let me realize that, hey, listen, we're all in this path together. We're all fighting for each other. We all got each other's backs. We're there to I'm saying, to support one another.
Right.
And we're learning as we go, that's how it should be.
Right.
Because the knowledge is organic and it's bottom up and it's substantive and it's built on substance.
And it's outside of time too. It's outside of time because he was old and we're like, a child of 7 days in a sense. So we're people that have just been born in this century. That's an old text, but it feels like he's talking to you. And by him being humble like that, that's an eternal thing. Him talking to us in the way that, the entire text, it's something that's eternal. The way that you treat your brethren and things like that. People fight for a lot of things in this world, but they're just going to die and it's going to be over. But the things that we fight for, they last forever. That's a nice feeling,
Yeah, and one of the things also about that book is that, okay, like the teaching on the dietary laws, he got that teaching from the epistle of Aristeas. All that stuff that he was talking about, that was in a book he was reading, and that's why he was saying as a student. There at the end when he did the 2 ways thing, that was out of the Didache, right? He was teaching certain things that he got from other sources. He quoted Enoch pretty heavily, as well in that book. So he was reading all of these books, and that book can actually be dated to after AD 70 because he speaks of the fallen temple and he talks about their plans to rebuild it. So that's one of the interesting books where we can date it as late 1st century, without a doubt. If it was, it couldn't have been before then. So you're talking about, like what you said, somebody who was late in life. There's always that question of whether or not it was him, but the idea was that whoever wrote that book, and I believe it was, I don't have any reason to believe it wasn't, but that being said, the book itself speaks for itself. It talks about how it uses the doctrine, so to speak, to open up people's eyes and to get them to see, read between the lines as to what these things mean in the metaphorical sense. And so for anybody who's reading the lost books of the Bible and the forgotten books of Eden or whatever, which is a book you can find, I think still, if you can find a bookstore, you might be able to find it. But anyways, those books are available online too. But the Epistle of Barnabas is a mind blower. It really is. That is a real paradigm shifter for anybody who's interested. If you're going to start out somewhere, that is a really good place to start, because that absolutely throws a lot of this traditional understanding out the window. And also the Epistle of Methodist to Diognetus is a little bit like that too, with the the dietary laws and all that. I don't want to get too far off topic, but the idea here is that I think all of us need to understand that because it is a unitary thought, you're able to transcend the canon because you understand the language. Because you understand the language, you're able to articulate mysteries, and because you're able to articulate mysteries, I guess the obligation, the expectation is that you do. That we get from the book of Enoch. Reveal it to them with your wisdom, and show it to them, and that's a command, and that's a general command. That's not for just 1 or 2 or 3 people. This is for everybody.
Right. Absolutely. So I know, Robert, we were going to possibly do some discussions later about the Gospel of Philip. So if you wanted to end the show here, and then we can do a follow-up show with hopefully get the text in the background with the Gospel of Philip and just go through that.
Yeah, we were going to kind of maybe try to do that, but we couldn't find a way to technically pull that off because the technical genius or whatever. But be that as it may, I'm going to still pursue that independently.
Right.
Again, it's something that I feel like I need to do because it needs to be done, and also because I don't know if I want to leave it to somebody else like right now. But I mean, that being said, it's just like I was saying before, I'm going to get pulled down in the weeds of this because every time I bring up a subject, it's a heavy topic. So I don't know if it's going to be like this continuous thing or like this ongoing thing that I might, pick up and leave off, or whatever. It's hard for me because you can't be just glib about it. You can't just go through and say, okay, this means this means that means that means that. You have to explain why this means this and
Well, you
why
said it's a long text too, right? It's super long.
it
So
is. It
it's
is kind of
difficult.
long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I sort of committed to it because I was listening to it and understanding it. But understanding it as you're listening to it,
And then teaching it's another thing. Yeah.
I don't know that I really fully took that into account when I committed to this. But that being said, it's a lot easier to understand something than it is to articulate it sometimes. And especially even if you know how to articulate it, it's like, well, I know because I know X, Y, Z or whatever, but then I have to bring up X, Y, and Z and explain why X is X. And then I have to explain why Y is Y and why Z is Z and why X, Y, and Z come together to form this idea. And you know what I'm saying? By the time you get through doing that, an hour.
It's a long video on a paragraph, basically.
Yeah. So,
That's
it is what it is. But I mean, that just belies the point. Anyone could do what I do. I took what I learned from Barnabas. I took what I learned from Aristeas. I took what I learned from all these other books, and I was able. The light came on in my head and in my heart and in my mind. To what the stuff was leading to. And I tried to do my due diligence, and I did. I learned A and B and C, and then what I knew about A, B, and C led to, D, E, and F, and then what I learned about that. You know what I'm saying? It grew, and it will grow. Anybody who's willing to commit to this path will grow in this path. It's left for us by them to use in our day.
Right. Absolutely.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell, if you want to call it that.
Well, thank you, Robert, for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, there's a threefold revelation. There are the keys. There is the light that's in the images being the earthly images, the light within them being the spiritual understanding of those earthly images, etc. It's just theme after theme after theme after theme. What's hidden, what's revealed, right? And it's so, I mean, that's kind of, like I said, that's kind of the long and the short of it. But by and large, there needs to be, I think, a lot more action on the part of a lot more people. People, I know you think you probably, I don't have it in me to do it. Maybe I got cold feet or something. But like I said, he's willing to use your talents. He's willing to use, your whatever it is you bring to the table. And he'll give you. If you give, you will get.
Well, not to mention that. Not to mention the fact that he gets a little mad at the people that don't use the gifts that they were given, and like the person that had like 10 minor or whatever, and then he gives him 10 more, and like he has 5 and he gives him 5 more, and the person that buried it, he didn't do too well when he was judged at the end or whatever.
There is the carrot and there is the stick. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. I get that. I wish I could say I'd done more of my due diligence along the road here, but like I said,
we have all real life stuff that we have to do too. It's not like there's not other things going on.
We're all caught up in the machinery. We can't not be. Most of us don't have that kind of time or the freedom to do everything we want to do. And the mundane takes up a lot of real estate in your mind and your day.
Yeah, but doesn't Shadrach say that in the Apocalypse of Shadrach? That's the reason that he asks God to only make it 20 days before a person's allowed to repent or whatever. He shortens the time that a man's allowed repentance because he says, well, what about this, God? Well, what about this? Well, look at all the stuff that happens in a man's life. He has all these things he has to go through. Can't you just give him like a little more time to repent than that or whatever? Like, so then finally God's like, fine, Shadrach, I'll let it only be 20 days that a man has before he dies to repent or whatever. So yeah.
You think about the penitent thief though on the cross. I mean,
right.
that very moment he had, it's very immediate.
Right.
I think a lot of this is a little bit theatrical and to prove a point. like Moses, or, on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah,
Right.
etc. The idea is that he's going to, he's going to forgive people. He's going to, the apocalypse, I don't want to keep bringing up other books and stuff like that, but the apocalypse of Peter basically makes it clear that everybody is eventually let off the hook.
Right.
And that's and for some people that's a harder message than throwing everybody in hell. They're like, what do you mean everybody's off the hook? What do you mean?
Right.
These people deserve to burn in hell. But I mean, that again, the idea is to make you magnanimous. That idea is to give you the heart of Christ. If he's there to forgive everybody, and look what he went through.
Right.
Look what he went through. He's already been beaten. He's already been abused. He's already been spat upon, and he's like, forgive them.
Right.
For they know not what they do. He does make a distinction, because those who do know what they're doing, that's different.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that, but yeah, if you consciously go against this, then that's bad news.
Yeah, he was a lot nicer to the woman that was adulterous than the Pharisees that were adulterous.
Yeah. But yeah, I think now is probably a good place to kind of sum this up. I think again, this is just kind of like a pep rally or something, to kind of get people on board with the idea that where do we go from here? I think we all need to manifest a little bit, to share a little bit. It helps if people share. It helps if people, give these things positive responses and stuff like that. It helps to spread the message. But it's more than that. I mean, that's something you could do, but I think everybody needs to be an active participant. We need to look at this in terms of like, if this was a class, that we were taking, you would produce works, you would produce reports, you would produce something, in tandem with the class. There would be participation, what I'm saying, so to speak. If this is a teaching, I'm not giving you a quote unquote assignment, because that's not my place. It's not my place to tell you what God's gift is. It's not for me to whisper in your ear what God wants to whisper in your ear. You know what I'm saying? That's not for me to decide.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So there's nothing, but I'm just saying, lend yourself, lend your members, to his service, and see what comes of it. That, that's the way forward, I think, is to produce works, and our works do follow us. You know what I'm saying? He is not unfaithful to forget us, forget what we've done and forget our works. He will remember those things.
Absolutely, I agree.
It's written in the time. Whatever you do is written in the time. Whatever you do cannot be undone. If you've contributed, that can't be undone. It can't, do something. Contribute.
I remember you saying that. He says, I will repay.
Mm-hmm. And he will. I'm convinced of that.
Right.
He does. I feel like, again, I don't want to drag this out too much, but I mean, again, in my own personal life, I got blessings coming in and out of every orifice. I can't even say it.
Right.
Almost absurd and ridiculous the way that it's jam-packed, shaken down, pressed together. It's unreal. And so even though I live in my own little obscurity, and even though people I know don't recognize what I say, I feel like, well, they like me even though they don't know what I have to contribute. They like me even though they don't know the importance of what it is that I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? That's how blessed I am. You know what I'm saying? So I believe there's a blessing in store for everybody. You know what I'm saying? I can witness to it. I can attest.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. And hopefully we can do another show like this again soon. And I really did learn a lot as well today. So thank you for your time, and hope to talk to you again soon.
It's always a pleasure, man. Thanks for all the hard work you do.
Thank you, Robert. Have a great day with your family. Take care.
Bye-bye.